Greetings again, all and any. Welcome back. For today's chapter, I'm doing chapter 48, 1066. We're growing ever closer to the end, but for now and for today, bid you join in with me as I say. Chapter 48, 1060. There were many moments that Fitzbjorn had come to see he lived his life for. He lived for fighting, contesting his warring skill against another warrior. Death or glory, nothing other. He lived for fucking, laying with a woman who truly wanted to get fucked. He lived for the feast, eating and drinking with his friends in such a way the gods would be impressed by. He lived for the time after a raid where he could share the plunder with his crew, and he lived for the love of life he'd grown to enjoy. And yet all of these, this moment he found himself in now, was his favorite. He likened it to the moment of orgasm with a woman, or the intense satisfaction of seeing his allies arguing over his plunder. He stood high upon the prow of the noble ship he steered, and looked toward the beach where he had planned his raid. It was still early dawn, the sun's light only barely lightening the gloomy blue horizon. Fitbjorn's crew sailed a snekja, a small but fast ship. This one was 25 meters long and held a crew of 38. It had room for more, but Fitbjorn liked to have it only slightly undercrewed. To his mind, it was always good to keep the beast hungry. The ship was named the Brynulf, in Hravald's honor, and they had already decided that when they earned another ship, they would call it the Passion of Inga. On the front of the Brynulf was a snarling dragon's head. Even if it was not a Drakar, the Brynulf was a dragon ship. There were no crashing waves, no booming thunder or cracking lightning. There was not the great tumultuous winds pressing the Brynulf onto their goal. There was only the crew of solemn and quiet warriors who pulled the oars and readied their minds for the fight to come. Raiding was growing more and more dangerous. Every report from the yearly assault on the Daneland spoke of ever-mounting resistance and a unified people who were not at all daunted by the yearly fight. Instead, they were being hardened by them. Today, the Brynulf and its crew rowed for the shore of an English settlement that was said to be rich farmland with good crop and fine harvest. It was late summer now. This would be the crew's last raid before returning to the safety of the Niels Valley for another winter, counting up the spoils and drinking in the steam. Fitbjorn looked forward to another winter cloistered in with Sidun by his side. Laird, Ragnar said, hanging off a rope by the prow. Ragnar, how far you think we be? Not far now. This early mist isn't too thick. We'll see the coast before long. It's quiet, especially for a farming village. Be ready. Fitbjorn smirked back at him, taking his eyes from the way ahead. We're all ready for anything, Ragnar. You know that. I need you to stay on the bow and watch the sights. Dostik and the others from up north haven't slowed their raiding. You never know these days what town will have more defense. Aye, things were easier longer ago. Fitbjorn smiled at the wistful tone. Back when there was no responsibility. Go where the ship went. Raid the sands, dwelling of peoples, the pirates, the corsairs. Celebrate every night and honor the dead, the very axes of the Emperor, Ragnar laughed. You and me, Bodil, Hafeld and Inga, Niels, and there were Olaf and Harold, those bastards. Aye, Ragnar, those were the days. Each morning brought us a new adventure, and each night a new treasure. You ever think about going back to Midgard? I do at times. I rather enjoyed me time there, but I didn't think I'll mind not to see it again. It were a grand escapade while it were. I have new adventures here with ye, laddie. It's never a dull season following the white bear about. There are many friends, I can think, who would no longer have their eyes to see adventure, or their blood to live it through. The glorious dead. We'll do a sip for him tonight, laddie, after this is fought and won. You ever think about your death, Ragnar? Where you'll be? What you'll be doing? Well, no. I mean, like many of ye here, I have no interest in dying some old and lame cripple, greyed out and too damn weak of life. Death in the field, fighting with axe in hand, is a fine end for me. I think you consider your own death oft too, dinna you, just? I do. I have a destiny to fulfill. But on that day, I will welcome it. The Valkyrie will take me to the Great Hall. I shall be drinking and dining with the gods. Rescue my father, too. That'll be the finest day of my life. And you and your healing talk. I'm bound for the kingdom, taken to God's glorious domain to serve him far after. He put together his hands to pray for exactly that. If that's where you are bound, I hope to the Norns you haven't been fated for such this day, my friend. That's a fate I wouldn't curse even upon Harold. Harold is a Christian. Oh, Fitzbjorn said with a smirk. Shut your tongue, laddie. I don't need nothing like this, especially not before a fight. How much fighting you think there will be? Oh, looks like we're about to see. There's the shore right there. Ready, Fitzbjorn said in a hissed whisper, and all the raiders at the front began to stow their oars, and they didn't need a count to do it with. Those at the back kept rowing, the strain of the whole ship now on their oars. Their job was to but do what they could. Brynulf beached on the shore, and the warriors leapt from the sides and landed on the beach. They all instantly spread out from it to form a protected zone that the rest of the crew could safely come to. Warriors waded from waist-deep water and came up onto the sandy shore, and all were looking around in excited anticipation, each waiting for some indication they were seen, or they were safe to set a blaze in the town with their war. Lord Bearman, Skadhild said with much defiant sarcasm in her voice. The last of the warriors were off the ship now, and all were forming into a circular wall 28 shields long. The town of houses ahead of them was quiet, strangely so. Advance! Check the houses, but be cautious. They could be waiting for us. Should we leave any rear guard at the ships in case there is a flank? Asked Knut. No need. We all advance together and keep our strength. But what if they come for the ship? He asked. Fitzbjorn didn't like to be questioned in front of the crew, but understood that this question must be on the minds of more than just Knut. Then we will deal with them afterwards. If we leave behind only a few, we may not be able to get back to protect them before they're overrun. If we leave back a large enough fighting force, then we split the crew and might not even have to. What if they set fire to the ship? Asked Gareth. Then we'll find a new one. Fitzbjorn calmed himself. No one told you this was supposed to be safe. That's why you're wearing armor. We will take what we need from Tostig if we have to. Now we raid. He spoke with authority, command, and confidence, and while he was annoyed at having to explain his orders, he respected the crew's acceptance of his reason. They pressed forward in a lightly foggy morning, clustering together into a tighter formation, but maintaining a strong front as they advanced. They came to the first home, watching all the flanks all the time, and readying for a surprise attack. The quiet of the morning was unnerving. The village appeared to have been abandoned for no reason. There is some dark magic here, Ilya said. There are spirits in the woods that have taken their souls. Hush, Fitzbjorn said. There's no dark magic here. Where are they? Asked Olavir, a warrior from Svitjod. Where is anyone? There was definite fear in his voice. We should go. We cannot take from the dead. We will be haunted. will be made into Draugr and to guard the barrows, a woman named Lisa said. Enough, Fitbjorn said with exaggerated assertion. Hold strong. He took a step forward ahead of the shield wall into the dangerous place. Niels, check that house there. Take two with you. Aye, Lord, he replied. Aaron, Bonebiter, come on, you two. Aye, they both replied, and the three went into the house. The rest of the party stood together and formed into a protective circle. There were some houses that broke sections of the circle, but they maintained discipline and watched the gray-white of the morning fog, expecting shapes to emerge running and screaming at any moment. White Bear, you're not going to believe this, Niels' voice said from within the house. Here, help me with it. You got that side, come on. A moment later, he emerged with Aaron of Norway and a man called Bonebiter. Between the trio was a large barrel, large enough to fit a whole man into. It's ale, Niels said, excited. Smell this. Fitbjorn looked around and went to where Niels was removing the lid. Inside the barrel was full of dark ale. He furrowed his brow at the sight, but smelled regardless. It smells good, he said. And there's another in the house. You two, go and check for it. The two men he'd indicated went into the house to retrieve the next barrel. And it's strong, Skadhild said. She'd put her leather-gloved hand into the barrel and tasted from it. It's delicious. I've never had a brown ale this good. Others of the reigning party started to turn from their positions and take sips from the barrel now, growing bolder and more rambunctious at the prospect of good drink. There's another barrel in the house too, and the wheel of cheese bigger than my head, Orm said, emerging from the house. I thank God loves me. We have all that we could want from a raid, and we didn't even have to fight. Looks like it's time to get our horns and celebrate early, by the light of burning houses, Stephen the Dane said with a laugh, and all others laughed with him. No, Fitbjorn said. It wasn't said loud enough, but everyone heard it, and everyone calmed their excitement at the sound. Something is wrong. He smelled the ale, then tasted it. It was indeed the strongest ale he'd ever had. It was almost like the drink Ragnar touted in the north of Scotsland. What of it, Fitbjorn? Asked Gisle. Maybe it's wrong, but here we are no matter. Let's celebrate. She shot a look at Ragnar, a look full of lust. It must be a poison, Fitbjorn said, and all stopped instantly again. What? Bonebiter said. He was a wolf, a man whose whole frame indicated ability for violent speed. There were few times the man ever let fear show in his scarred and bearded face, but now Bonebiter looked afraid. Did they just kill me? I think perhaps it's not that kind of poison. We were supposed to find these barrels, and we were supposed to assume they'd all fled, and then drink ourselves to a stupor in celebration. This is a trap. These barrels, all the food of the houses, we are supposed to take it all and ignore our diligence. He was still lost in thinking. Well then, Ragnar said, why don't we all just take what we can find and get on back on to the ship and fuck off? Get ourselves gone and celebrate out to sea. Fitbjorn breathed in through his nose. If they are planning something like this, they'd never let that happen. They are out there, and they are waiting for us to do that exactly, or to be drunk enough that they can destroy us. Make the circle! He pushed through the men out back towards the beach as they all gathered to make a protective formation. He looked over the top of the roofs and saw a line of trees beyond, up a small hill. The trees looked to be at about 100 paces away. The fog was beginning to clear, and he could clearly see there was a steep slope up the hill that had no obstacles upon it. Any army up that hill would have an easy and fast time to run down it and slam into the unsuspecting and unprepared raiders. Oh, you up there! Fitbjorn called in English. Thanks for the ale. We drink it when you're dead. His pronunciation was poor, and there were many words he was missing, but he learned some from Ragnar. Together! Push! Push up the beach! To the tree line! He commanded in a stronger tone, and all the raiders abandoned the barrels to gather together into a strong shield wall. Hoo! They all shouted together and started to walk forward. The shield wall flowed around the houses, evolving as it needed to in order to keep strong and not bunch together and offer the archers that must be up there the target they needed. For the Allfather! For to the warring god! Ho, 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 ho! The party all responded. Then there was a thrumming noise that cut the air, and whistling followed it, and an arrow slammed into Neil's shield. The arrow made the reverberating noises of struck wood as it vibrated in place, angry at having been forced to stop dead. Forward! He shouted as another arrow landed on a rooftop. Then came more. Together, they reached the edge of the houses and kept on pressing toward the hill, and each kept their shield up and toward the trees, knowing they could get shot through at any moment. They heard English shouting coming from up high on the hill, and with a quick glance, Fitbjorn could see some of the enemies stepping out from the tree line. We can't fight on this slope, he said to himself. An arrow struck his shield just as he thought this, and he grit his teeth in frustration at the predicament. He looked back and thought perhaps it would have been better to make for the ship and bait the English. They were, however, all consumed with the momentum of combat and wanted to make for their enemy, which is that this is precisely the opposite of what they would expect. The English were so unprepared for them pressing forward toward their position that they were now forming their own shield wall. Fitbjorn took in all this information and tried to synthesize a plan of attack. We could abandon formation and charge them. They'd never expect that. He heard the thump of another arrow and knew this would be disastrous, as their archers would see the opportunity and organize into volleys. Flanking won't work. Too far to go. We need to push the tree line, and then they aren't making a shield wall. We need speed. We need speed. Faster! Reach that line, but do not break from the shield wall, or you'll be cut down. At this command, the pace increased, and they all felt the heat rising from the effort. The English line at the trees was composed of archers who were now in the process of frantically drawing and loosing shot to try and halt the advance. Their panic was apparent in their movements and reduction in accuracy. An arrow caught the metal rim at the top of Ragnar's shield, and it was sent buzzing up and over the rest of the army behind him. They heard another of their rank get struck, and she screamed as she fell. Those behind her covered to protect, while they beside her locked together to close up the opening there made. Oh, I should have had some of that ale, Ragnar said loudly to Fitbjorn. He chuckled back. Aye, well you didn't, laddie, Fitbjorn replied, and now you die sober. Oh, is that right? Well then, I'll outlive the day just to show you. See you there. On to Valhall. Rise, and rise faster. Hurrah! Many among them shouted some excited version of this, and they soon reached the trees. With a scream of power, Fitbjorn tucked his shield to the side and swung with his axe and killed a man who stood waiting for their arrival. The Englishman had been focusing his attention on Skadhild to Fitbjorn's right, and so was unready as he died. The enemy, English, were not prepared to make a coherent shield wall to stop the raiders. Some few had shields, but it was many archers standing near the front who were now retreating or drawing swords their own. Ragnar swung heavily with his great crossguard sword. He had to put down the shield against a tree when it was safe, and stuck by Fitbjorn's right side to support an attack with his defense. To Fitbjorn's left side, Niels appeared. The left hand was obviously not wielding a sword or axe in his injured right, but he had been training like mad to use his shield as effectively as possible. It was no easy thing for a warrior to do, but he accepted the limitation and had decided to become the most important pillar of the battle from where he could participate. His right arm in his right arm, he held His right arm he held behind him and bladed his body to make more space for another warrior to stand at his left. He scanned the enemy's eyes, looking for indication of attack and ready to intervene where he could. Niels had come to learn the wisdom of the old saying, if you have only to choose one weapon, choose a shield. Fitbjorn struck with the axe, and it glanced off an English helmet with a spark and a loud clang. The great wide blade of Ragnar's sword then sliced at the side and dispatched the man with a quick cut. He then saw Niels' shield rise to catch the sword blade, and he readied to swing his axe. The shield went down as he'd already started his strike, and it revealed a bearded Englishman's head that he hit perfectly. What came next was a strange rarity that Fitbjorn had only seen happen thrice before. This weird magic thing was so nebulous in nature he could not even put a name to it, but it was so distinctly recognizable when it occurred that he could see it building and knew exactly when it would happen. A roar began somewhere behind him, and he knew then in an instant that it was begun. The roar was of voices. It carried in it a primal and unexplainable, audacious will for momentum. The warriors who'd stood on the line of the shield wall started to surge forward with a collective force to complete the hill. This tide of the roar rushed and met the English and pressed against them with a power like they'd not shown before. And the English fell back from it. Perhaps it was his vast experience and understanding of battles, fighting men, disposition, formations, weapons, or some other unnamed ability, but he could see it as clearly as he could a growing wave. It might be his nature, as Skadhild had called his world reading, that allowed him to foresee and know intuitively that this push was coming and that it would work against their foemen. Raiders swarmed around the sides of Fitbjorn, Niels, and Ragnar, and they were carried forward by the shared movement like it was a river. And as before, each sword stroke and axe swing began to flow so naturally that the English defense became less effective. Suddenly, Fitbjorn felt he could see the strikes of his axe before they happened. Every opening in his enemy posture was clear, and he knew how he could use the opportunities. One such opening arose, and he twisted his body to ready the next swing. But as he was turning to deliver it, Ragnar's sword blade swung from where he fought and killed the man. That wasn't mine! Then you should have taken it, White Bear! They're breaking! Shouted Skadhild, who'd come to Ragnar's side and was fighting with her two-handed great axe. She threw herself heedlessly forward, as she'd been warned against doing countless times. Skadhild lunged with a cry and clove her axe blade into an exposed enemy back. Then she twisted to face the other way and now just caught a sword on the reinforced haft. Fitbjorn's axe swung down at that instant and killed the man. He pressed forward to guard Skadhild's side as she focused on her left, and Ragnar came up to her right while Niels continued to guard the weak left side. And they all pushed further and further through the trees. As they fought and advanced, it was quickly obvious to Fitbjorn that there had been and were still many English, well armed and well prepared for this attack. He had no idea how they could have known where he'd land and attack, or how this army had prepared and formed up against him so quickly either. The accusations back in the village of magic seemed more and more plausible. Seeing the number of enemy soldiers made him slow his advance, though. They had 2 times his own number, if not more, and if they decided to form a line instead against the raiding party, they could have a great odds at success. He could not let them come to that conclusion. He needed to keep them from making a formation. He needed them scattered and unable to consider tactic. Fortunately, he knew something else as useful from all his time and experience as a warrior, a raider, and a soldier. Once a fight was underway, discipline and organization was extremely difficult to maintain and nearly impossible to reestablish if lost. The enemy force seemed to have lost their reorganization with the raiders' unexpected behavior, and that was the advantage he'd punished them with. "We need spears!" he shouted to Ragnar over the din of battle. We have spears, laddie! There, and oof! He ducked a sword thrust, and then countered with a low strike that sent the enemy straggling. We have spears! No, us! We are this! No, us! We are the spears! What? Niels said, overhearing. Fitbjorn then charged forward and slammed into a man with his shield. He shouted a low battle cry as he did so, and put fear into the enemy's hearts. His friends, of course, followed him. Followed after him, and they made the shape of a wedge as he pressed forth. The other Vikingar behind didn't want their friends to be cut off, and so they followed with sword and axe brandished, and they cut the English line through. Thereafter, the battle grew even more disorganized. The English were spread out through the trees, and there were very few pockets where any kind of command structure was relevant, while the raiding warriors needed no hierarchy and fought as individuals. Fitbjorn had wanted most of all to reach the end of the enemy host and to get to their caravan, if they had one, but quickly found himself on the outskirts of the fight. He looked to where the fighting still raged and breathed hard, thinking the battle all but won now. Then he saw an English draw a bow and aim an arrow at him. His mind was so calm in the moment that he barely flinched, although he'd thrown down his shield at some point for an enemy spear that had landed in it and made it unwieldy. He had taken up a two-handed Dane axe somewhere else, as this was a far more comfortable weapon to him than the one-handed axe. He waited for the arrow to come flying his way. He saw the archer loose and heard the thrum of the arrow, but it whistled wide to his left. When he looked back, he saw, to his horror, that Ragnar was hit. Fitbjorn's eyes widened as Ragnar fell and began to moan from the pain. Then he realized that he, Niels, and Ragnar were cut off from the rest of the army, and he stood in a narrow space between thick cloisters of trees. The enemy archers rallied some of his fellows, and they all turned their attention to the black-haired raider now. They could see that they were alone, and they thought to go pursue the moment they'd found. Fitbjorn stood there, alone before the enemy with only an axe. But he would not be moved. Niels was one-handed. Ragnar was wounded. He would happily die 1,000 deaths protecting them, and he readied himself for exactly that. I hope you're watching, Father. I wish I was holding your axe this day. The enemy rushed towards him, and he backed up to use the trees on either side to narrow their advance. 4 men stood together, the bright gray of their armor flashing in the sun's light as it passed through the trees. 3 were bearded, the other clean-shaven, and young, just a boy. They each of them had a look of wretched, excited hatred on their faces. They were so damn happy that they were going to kill him. Fitbjorn wondered how many times he'd looked like that at his enemies before slaying them. It didn't matter now. This could be the way he would die. No, he thought. Remember that sense of precision and purpose with the tide of the battle. The push. The strange and powerful sensation of knowing how to move, where to be, and where the axe should fall. That sense of clarity ran through his mind with startling agility. Now is not when the changing of kings is meant to be. He spoke louder and louder the closer he got to the end of the sentence, and stood, ready. They lunged. The eldest man among them had streaks of gray in his beard, and he rushed in with his pointed shield and sword of good English make. Fitbjorn knew he could make no concession or feint back toward his friends. He had to press or stay still. He stabbed high and knocked the sword aside with his superior weight of his own weapon. Then he swung back in a flash of silver, and the blade sunk into the man's gambeson with a weighty, heavy crack. He knew he'd broken ribs with the strike. He could feel it. One day, I shall fall to such a strike. The old man crumpled as he fell back, not yet admitting to himself that he was dead. The others swung around him and came at him from the left and right. Fitbjorn's axe head was to his left side after withdrawing it, and he jumped slightly to the right as he swung again. The maneuver caught the man by surprise, and he panicked a moment, but this hairy, brutish barbarian bearing down on him. Fitbjorn killed a young English boy, and his mind ceased to think of him as soon as he wasn't a threat. He'd likely never think of the boy ever again. There were countless men dead that he'd never think of again. Perhaps they awaited him within the doors of Valhalla, readying the feast. He hadn't time enough to strike at the next man properly with the axe head, and so he pushed the butt of the haft towards and caught the man in the throat viciously. The man wheezed in with the instant and recoiled some. The final man had seen all the others die and fall, and he stood alone. He stared at Fitbjorn with wonder and bewilderment in his eyes. God almighty! The strength of his determination was disappearing. That was plain to see. The white bear held the axe in his hand and stalked forward. He'd seen the intent to kill in the man's expression and knew that he hesitated now for fear, not mercy. No, please, the man said. Then he turned to run. As he started to leave, though, an arrow found his underarm and sent him to the side. Fitbjorn's shoulders lowered as he sighed loudly. He walked over to where the man was struggling and gasping. God be with you, he said in his native Norse, and then he chopped swiftly and cut his head off. He looked over to see Gisli standing 50 paces away, her bow still outstretched and sweat dripping from her exposed chin. Is Ragnar dead? She asked in a near shout. I don't know, he responded. I'm not dead. Niels put Ragnar's arm over his shoulder and carried him to standing. They made their way for where Gisli stood with the rest. We won? Niels asked, though it was more an observation. Ragnar had an arrow sticking out of his right side of his chest. I let it. We've won. And there's nae a man left to defend that strong brown ale we found in the village. So I'm going to drink myself to a stupor, and then you can pull this bloody thing out of my chest. Niels and the Fitbjorn laughed. He then tugged a little on the arrow shaft, and it came clean out of his front. We'll leave a little for us, Ragnar. It really is very good. Fuck me, it hurts. But the arrow didn't make it through the armor. You're fine. They spent the rest of the day clearing the battlefield and raiding the stores and the houses, and then they loaded and readied the ships. Raiding was more than only fighting. It was also a remarkable amount of work. They spent the night drinking, eating, fucking singing, telling story, celebrating the fact that they were still living. They toasted the dead and devoted their victory to various gods. End of chapter 48. Love that moment. I love that line especially. Did they just kill me? Yeah, that was a cool moment. Writing that a long time ago. Well, here's to spending your days celebrating the fact that you are living. I've been drinking mead out of this horn the whole time. I know that comes as no surprise to anyone who spent any time on this channel. And yet still, I thank you all for joining me in whatever capacity you may have done, whether watching or listening. You guys are all wonderful and lovely. And don't forget to celebrate the fact that you are alive. Because I don't.